Jim and Duncan, you may or may not remember, are 56 Degree Insight, a pair of clever men who have for the past, I guess, almost around a year now, brought the tourism industry information it wasn't getting somewhere else, timeously and accurately, and through a period where access to accurate and authoritative information and insight has been super important to the industry. And I know that you guys are at the big tourism table with the STA and STARG, and I know everyone looks out for the next rounds of the consumer insight. So I am excited, and I'm sure everyone else is, to hear the output from the most recent one. This is a webinar, not a meeting. My bad. So please do feel free to unmute yourself and chat and that kind of stuff, but also feel free to put questions into the chat box, and I will keep an eye on it to make sure that I don't miss any of them. Without any further ado, because nobody needs to hear more from me, Jim and Duncan, gentlemen.
Thank you, Laurie. I'm going to share my screen now. That was quite an introduction. I don't know how we're going to live up to that one. We'll do our best, but thank you. And hello again to those of you who've sat through one of our presentations before. This is the most recent wave of research we're going to share with you. Research which was undertaken just over a month ago now, actually. So you could argue it's already becoming a bit out of date in as much as things are moving so quickly. It was just before the First Minister's announcement in mid-March around, with dates around the opening up of tourism and so on. And obviously, there's more certainty now than there was even back then. But it still provides a good understanding of levels of uncertainty and interest in tourism generally amongst the Scottish population at that time. And things will have moved on, but there's still going to be quite a lot of uncertainty there. So I'm going to talk you through the results. Bit of very brief background to the survey. For those of you who haven't maybe seen it before, this is the 5th time we've undertaken the research. The previous 4 waves are on the screen there. We did it, first of all, a year ago, just under a year ago, at the beginning of May. As Laurie said, there wasn't anything else out there about how Scots were feeling about tourism at the time. We felt that was important that for the tourism industry in Scotland to understand the domestic market, because that was always going to be the market that was going to come back first. So during that first period of lockdown, we undertook a wave of research to get their views and opinions in May, and we repeated that again in June. And then again in July, the week before tourism reopened, we repeated the research then. And we did the final wave last year at the end of August. And that was more of a retrospective, looking back at the previous 6 weeks after tourism had reopened to understand the experiences, what people had liked, how it lived up to expectations and so on. Now, at that time, we thought that might be it. We might not be doing this again because I think back then we didn't know there was going to be another lockdown, a more severe lockdown in so many ways for us this year. We also, that was before the vaccination program had come into place. So there was a lot of things have changed since then. But we decided in March this year, beginning of March, that we needed to revisit the Scottish Tourism Index and find out how people were feeling about tourism this year. So we've repeated a lot of the questions we asked last year to see how things have moved on. The survey was undertaken amongst a representative sample of Scots, so Scottish residents. I say Scots, Scottish residents. You don't have to be Scottish to live in Scotland, as we all know. People who live in Scotland, a representative sample. And so representative in terms of demographics, in terms of where they live, region of origin and so on. And there was a survey of just over 500 people undertaken, as we had done in the previous waves. We spoke to people between the 11th and the 14th of March, and we worked with our panel providing partners, Yonder Data Solutions, previously known as Populous, the same people we worked with last year. So it's all very, very consistent with what we did last year. So what we're going to cover today, I'm going to cover the first 3 bullets that are on the screen there. How Scots are feeling generally about travel at the moment, or certainly back in mid-March, how they were feeling. Then we start narrowing it down a little bit and finding out, well, where are they considering? Where might they go? So looking at destinations and the varying desirability levels of different types of destination. Then we focus very much on Scotland and Scottish staycation prospects. Just what are the numbers potentially likely to be, who's in the frame for at least considering a Scottish holiday, who is further down that purchase funnel than others, and so on. Then I'm going to hand over to Duncan at that point. He's going to talk you through the real meat, I think, of the presentation, which is the anatomy of the Scottish staycation. So what are these staycations going to look like? Those are going to take a staycation. What are they going to look like? What type of accommodation will people use? When will they take them? Where will they go? What activities will they undertake? Will they eat out? Will they tend to buy produce and eat in their holiday accommodation? All that sort of stuff. And Duncan's also going to talk you through the impact on communities. So the other angle of all of this is, well, we're all keen to encourage more and more Scots to take holidays at home this year, but there's obviously always going to be a balance in terms of the impact on communities. And last year when we did the survey, there was a lot of concern in some parts of the country around visitors coming in. How does that look this year compared with last year? Don't worry about taking copious notes. You'll see at the bottom of the screen, and it's on every slide, so there should be time between now and completing the presentation for you to take a note of it. You can download the whole report from our website. It's freely available. You can also download the previous ones if you want to do any comparisons. So it's all there, and so don't worry if you miss a number or miss a figure or whatever, you'll be able to get it there. Okay, that's enough introduction. Before we look at attitudes and behaviours around Scots taking home holidays, let's begin by looking at their feelings about travel in general. And let's take a step back to a year ago, back in May 2020. There's a wide spectrum of opinion towards holidays and breaks among Scots back then, with COVID-19 having some people a major impact on how they were feeling about travel, for others less of an impact on how they were feeling about travel. So you can see on the slide here on the left-hand side of the screen, 11% of Scots last May, during first lockdown, were saying, I'm not even thinking about travel at the moment. I'm nervous about the whole idea. I feel very, very wary. And there's some quotes there from people. I'm in the shielded group. I'll be very cautious of going away anywhere until no COVID-19 has passed. Feel nervous, going to avoid travel till it's settled. So that proportion of the population. But you also had on the right-hand side people who said, well, nothing's really changed. As soon as I'm able to, I'm out here, I'm going to take holidays and continue as before. Makes me desperate to go traveling. I'm still not scared to go to places. I think if you take care, you should be okay. It's like the cold or the flu. If you don't pick up the virus, you can't get sick. So a lot of early views on the virus back then in May, obviously. But it's fair to say the vast majority of Scots, around about 75%, were between these two extremes, in that orange sector in the middle, and with a whole range of opinions around, yeah, I'm looking forward to be able to taking a holiday again, but I'm going to wait until it's safe. I try to avoid public places when I do. I'm going to be wary about being alongside lots of people and so on. So a year on, and we all know a lot more about the virus, and so much has happened in the last year. How are people feeling now about travel? Now, we asked this question in a slightly different way this year. Instead of asking it in an open-ended fashion, we provided people with 5 different buckets that they could put themselves in. From the dark red, thinking about travel generally this year, how are you feeling? It's not in my thoughts. I'm not thinking about holidays at all in 2021. I have other priorities. Then the lighter red, something for later. I'm not thinking about holidays at the moment. That's something for later. And then in the middle, yeah, probably something I'll do later in the year. I plan to take a holiday. It'll probably be a bit later in the year. And then the further to the right we go, the more people are thinking in terms of taking one sooner. So the light green, probably something I'll do in the summer. I'm keen for a holiday at some point in the summer when it's safe to do so. And then the dark green, as soon as possible. I'm desperate to take a holiday and will do so as soon as it is possible. So where do the Scots population sit on that, on these different elements? So I'm going to look at them in blocks. So first of all, the red section, if you like, those who are not really thinking about holidays at the moment. Some more less so than others. I mean, 22% not at all in their thoughts at the moment. 27%, it's something for later. So yeah, it's something in the back of my mind. I'm looking forward to a holiday, but I'm not ready yet to commit to anything. I'm not thinking about where or whatever. It's something for later. And you can see there underneath how that varies by different life stages. So pre-nesters, so that's the pre-family group, tend to be under 35, no children in the household. So quite often it's younger couples or individuals themselves living on their own. You'll see that they are the least likely to be in these 2 red categories, whereas empty nesters, age 55 plus, are more likely to be wary of travel at the moment. And then you've got families who are somewhere in between the two. But where there's a bigger difference is in terms of affluence, if you like. So socioeconomic groups, ABC ones versus C2DEs. So ABC ones are the more professional managerial occupations, if you like. C2DEs are lower affluence, lower household income, and so on. And you can see there that clearly income is playing a part in this, and we'll come on back to that in a few moments. C2DEs are less likely to be considering holidays. Now, generally in Scotland, the tourism industry fishes within the ABC1 markets anyway. They tend to be the ones most likely to be considering holidays here, but C2DEs are still very, very important, and especially for certain destinations. So that's important to bear in mind. So in terms of the people who are in that middle category, it's something I'll probably do later in the year. You'll see there that it varies quite a bit by the different segments. The important point is almost a quarter of Scots are in that category, 23%. And then I'll put the final two categories up together, the two green categories, because these are the ones who are the most likely to take holidays sometime soon, basically, whether it's as soon as I can, i.e. hopefully as soon as we're able to stay overnight again, away from home in May, hopefully, as opposed to that category, the lighter green are those who are going to do it as soon as possible in the summer. So they're kind of much the same. A lot of people kind of put themselves into either of these boxes, but you'll see that accounts for 28% of Scots, but particularly likely to be pre-nesters, fairly likely to be families, more likely to be families, much less likely to be empty nesters, and more likely to be ABC1s and C2DEs. So quite a lot of variation there. So what is driving these opinions? Why are some people in the almost rejecting that or not thinking about holidays at the moment versus those who are desperate to do so? So we asked that question. We asked people who said, holidays aren't in my thoughts, or it's something for later, which was 49%, almost half of Scots. Why are you thinking that way? And you'll see there that the largest proportion talk about concerns over safety, and there's still too much risk of transmission to consider holidays. That accounts for 25% of them. Feel it's too soon, not a priority, levels of uncertainty are too high, and there are significant economic impacts of COVID-19 also playing a part for some. And again, I'll come back to that in a few moments. And there's some quotes underneath there. I'm not going to read them all out, but I would just read one of them. I'm not confident it will be safe to take a holiday this year, even when we've had the vaccine. I still think there could be a further lockdown around the summer. So in early to mid-March, that was still the feeling of almost half of Scots. What about the ones who are in the middle, who would like to take a holiday this year, but they're thinking it'll be later on in the year? So that's almost a quarter of Scots in that category. Well, the reasons why they feel that are quite similar to the first group. It's just that the timing issues are more significant. Almost a third of them are keen to take a holiday, but not until things have settled down. The vaccine rollout provides this group with hope, but it's a hope that will bear fruit later in the year when restrictions are more likely to be lowered. And then the group that we're most likely to get early travel from, the 28% of Scots who want to take a holiday soon or within the summer, this is governed by a need to travel. A lot of them use the word, I need to take a holiday. I'm desperate to get away. And 44% of them said they deserve a break. They want to escape. They need a holiday. So there's a big desire there for a holiday, a feeling they've been at home for so long, they want to get away. I think we could all understand that feeling, undoubtedly. But for these people, it means I need a holiday now. And again, just a couple of quotes. Because I enjoy traveling, I usually travel often, I've missed doing it since the pandemic started. It'll be nice to get a change of scene too. So that's kind of driving all of that. So let's take a look at some of the underlying issues that might be affecting these feelings. And one of the key determinants of holidays and travel for any individual is financial. And we've tracked the impacts of COVID-19 on the pockets of Scots during each wave of the tourism index. So when we asked this in May and June last year, around a third of Scots claimed that their personal finances had been impacted significantly by the pandemic and by the restrictions, 33% each month. And that could be unemployment, it could be furlough, it could be just less income coming in for whatever reason. So a large proportion, and that figure has been quite consistent across a number of surveys, 33%. In August, it increased a little bit as the furlough scheme initially at that point came to an end and government support started to be removed. It increased to 35%. So what's it looking like in March? Well, it's very, very similar, 34%. And again, this impacts differently across different groups. More likely to be impacted are the pre-nesters, 47%, so younger people, 47% of the younger people are basically saying their income has been adversely impacted by significantly adversely impacted by coronavirus. More likely to be families, 43%, and C2DEs, so that socioeconomic group at 39%. And slightly less likely empty nesters, where maybe there's a greater proportion who are retirement, so they're not the same immediate direct impact on their income, and ABC ones, slightly less likely as well. So financial impacts are definitely going to play a role this year. Another dampening desire that we saw last year was for air travel. It's been a feature of Scots opinion throughout the pandemic, and it's undoubtedly going to be the case in 2021. Now, when we asked it last year, we asked it at different points in 3 different ways. We asked it in June. We said, how likely are you to consider travelling by air at all, anywhere during last year, during 2020? And 68% of them said they were unlikely to do so. So a very small proportion last year in June were thinking air travel was something that would be on their agenda. When we asked the question again in July, we were a bit more specific. We said, how likely would you be to consider travelling by air for a holiday or break during 2020? And that was a bigger proportion who were unlikely, 78%. So some of that 68% or 32% in the first group would be maybe people who are thinking in terms of business travel or necessary travel to see family and so on. But when it came to holidays, it was not on the agenda for the vast majority of Scots. And in August, we asked them, well, what about next year, 2021? And this was really interesting back in August because we didn't know what was ahead of us. But even then, 60% of Scots were saying they were unlikely to consider travelling by air in 2021 for a holiday. So what's it looking like in March this year? Well, we asked them how likely they were to, same sort of questions we asked in August, how likely are you to consider travelling by air for a holiday or break during 2021? And 72% of them are ruling it out, unlikely 72%. And especially the case amongst empty nesters, slightly more so amongst families and C2DEs, and pre-nesters and ABC ones less likely to, or more likely to consider it, but it's still the minority who would. So if nothing else, this clearly illustrates that you know, the recovery period for the air industry is some long way off. And this does open doors of opportunity for domestic tourism, but we've also got to remember that air travel brings people into the country as well. So, you know, this is the other side to the coin of all of this. International travel is not going to be happening anytime soon, as far as people were concerned in March. Now, this may have moved a little bit in the last month because of, you know, more talk around vaccine passports and so on. We'll actually come on to that on this next slide. But before I talk about vaccine passports, first of all, one thing that was in the news quite a bit in early March, and February and March, when it was introduced by the Scottish Government, was the requirement to self-isolate in airport hotels from any international travel at all at a cost of £1,750. We asked people, if this was to remain in place as a requirement when holiday travel abroad becomes possible again, what sort of impact would it have on your likelihood to take overseas holidays? And clearly it shows that that would almost be, even if they weren't really considering it anyway because of the air travel concerns, this would be the final straw, really. There's no way they would consider, you know, for 90%, it would rule out overseas holidays. So that's one side of the coin. The other thing that's been talked about quite a lot in the last month has been the whole issue of vaccine passports. So we asked people, well, and we asked it in quite a broad way, deliberately, because we you know, plans are not, certainly in that case, we're at fairly early stages. We said, if vaccine passports were introduced to provide proof you'd been vaccinated against coronavirus to allow you to travel more or attend large events, to what extent would you support that? And you'll see that pretty much, I know it's a big political issue for a lot of people, the people and for the country as a whole, but 78% said, you know, on that basis, they would consider it. It's something they would support. So quite interesting. And obviously things have moved on a bit in the last month around all of that, and it remains to be seen what way that's going to go, but quite interesting anyway. So that's enough background about how people were thinking. I'm now going to quickly take you through the desirability of different destinations. Now, last year we introduced something that we called the Tourism Desirability Score, a measure of the relative appeal of holiday trips in Scotland versus further afield in Britain versus overseas, if you like. And we asked it around different types of environmental location. So city breaks, countryside rural breaks, seaside coastal breaks. And we asked people to rate the extent to which they were likely, well, I think we asked how likely were you to take this type of trip or consider this type of trip when tourism becomes possible again, from a scale from 1 up to 10. And the more people were likely to consider it, the closer to 10 they would give it a score. And what we did was we actually turned all this into a score out of 100 just to make it easier. So it's not a percentage, but it's an index score. So let me just share with you what people were saying about Scotland. So we repeated this in March this year for Scotland. And what you see on the left-hand side here is that an index score, a desirability score, an emotive desirability score of 61 out of 100 for Scots taking a home holiday as soon as it's possible to do so. Now that compares with May and June last year of 59 and 58 respectively. So if anything, it's not much in it, but it's gone up slightly. The desirability for a home holiday has increased slightly. Now some of that will be because they had a good experience last year, or because they feel that things are slightly safer now, that more of us have been vaccinated and so on. But either way, that's quite a positive picture. But what you see on the right-hand side of the slide is that it does vary by type of destination. So rural destinations such as Moray Speyside have a higher index, a higher desirability score of 65 than cities and towns on the right-hand side, which have got a desirability score of 57. And the seaside and coast, very similar to countryside, quite a high level of desire. Now, it does vary by life stage. Again, this is just Scotland we're talking about here. So what we see here is that desirability for holidays generally in Scotland is higher amongst pre-nesters and families than it is amongst empty nesters. Now, we saw earlier that that's the case with holidays to any destination, and that still holds true for Scotland as well, as you can see. Very high levels of desirability, 69, 68 for pre-nesters and families. And for families, especially the idea of going to the seaside and coast, which makes sense, 71 out of 100. And for pre-nesters, I mean, they're both high, but countryside at 72 is particularly appealing. And again, towns and cities, less appealing generally. Now, that's not surprising amongst the home holiday market generally. As Scots, when we take holidays in Scotland, we're less likely to consider cities than we would if we were going further afield. That said, breaks to the likes of Glasgow from, say, the north, or to Aberdeen from the south, or whatever, are things that are on many people's agendas, maybe slightly less so at the moment for various reasons. So how does that compare with elsewhere in the UK, with England and Wales? Well, that overall score that we saw of 61 out of 100 for Scotland, it comes down to 44 out of 100 for England and Wales. So much more suppressed desirability to travel further afield in the UK. Fairly similar levels to last year, if anything, slightly up on what it was in June. It was 41 in June last year, it's now 44. Probably a reflection of the vaccination programme and so on, which is encouraging. And what you will see there is there's very little difference by type of destination, type of location. It's fairly consistent. And for going further afield, for going overseas, well, it's lower again. It's 38 out of 100. And actually, this has gone down a little bit compared with last year. So even more of a dampened enthusiasm for the idea of going abroad than was the case in May and June last year. So, things haven't moved hugely. I'll just put all this up. We all have a league table. And it's quite a nice one from a Scottish point of view, because you see very clearly the main distinction here is I'm going to take a holiday at home in Scotland, the first 3 bars, the highest scores of Scotland. Then I might consider going further afield to other parts of the UK before I consider going abroad, and especially to rural locations and the seaside and coast. So destinations like Moray Speyside, there's potential there for you. Now, that's all well and good, but we want to get a bit more of an understanding of what this actually means in terms of what people will do. So that's been very emotive in terms of what people feel they want to do. But what about the practicality of what they'd actually consider? So likelihood to visit. What we've got on this chart here from bottom to top, so from dark red up to dark blue, is likelihood to consider. So definitely won't is dark red, definitely will is dark blue. And we've got this for Scotland, England and Wales, European destinations, and long-haul destinations. And probably best illustrated by, if I put up the Scottish data first of all. So this is Scots who likelihood to consider a holiday in Scotland this year. And Encouragingly, 46% of them say they're either definitely going to take one, that's 23%, or they're very likely to do so, 23%. Now, we've not got any timescales on this other than this year. We'll come on to timings a little bit later, but around about half of Scots are quite likely to take a holiday. Actually, 24% say quite likely. I would normally take that with a pinch of salt. Some of these will turn into holidays, a lot of them won't. These people are much further down any sort of decision making. What we saw last year was people who were in the quite likely category were less likely to actually take a holiday when push came to shove. So it's these top two categories that are very, very important. So that's a big proportion of the Scottish population. Almost half the adults in Scotland are in the market for a Scottish holiday this year. Now, when we look at it for other parts of the UK, for England and Wales, for example, what you see there is a much lower level of interest at 21%, who are either definitely will take a holiday or very likely to do so. And I'll just put up European destinations and further afield in the same slide. And you can see there that basically the further you go away from Scotland, the less likely it is, and a lot more red on the chart. And again, this is one to look at when you download the report rather than cover here. I'm just going to give you the general pattern here. When we put the different life stages on, you'll see that, again, empty nesters are least likely to be taking holidays anywhere. More likely to do so in Scotland than anywhere else, but pre-nesters and families are more likely to be considering them. So, and what we actually see there, if you look at the Scottish data for trips in Scotland, families are most likely to say, I'm definitely taking a holiday. It's actually a third of families say, I'm definitely taking a Scottish holiday this year. And a lot of that will be down to links to school holidays and so on. So there's an awful lot of data here. I appreciate that. But hopefully you can see the patterns. And this is going to be a very clear message as we go through. So the final section I'm going to cover before I hand over to Duncan are the staycation prospects for 2021. So now we're focusing very much just on Scotland, turning the spotlight fully on Scotland. And we asked people specifically what their plans were for holidays in Scotland in 2021. And we gave them another spectrum of options from no intention of taking a Scottish holiday, which is the red box on the right-hand side, through to not thought in detail, but might take a holiday in Scotland this year, in 2021, seriously considering a 2021 Scottish holiday, already planning one, and already booked one. So very much the purchase funnel, if you like. So the further to the left, the further down the purchase funnel they are in many cases purchased. Now, this was mid-March. Things will definitely have changed since then. There'll be more green, hopefully more dark green on the chart. There'll be more of those who were planning back in March who will now have booked. And hopefully more of those who were seriously considering a holiday will now be planning a holiday. So everything should have moved a little bit over to the left, which is important. Now, when we put numbers against that, you'll see that if we combine the first three green categories, from already booked to planning to seriously considering, that accounts for 37% of Scots. So remember the previous slide where 46% Scots said they were very likely or definitely would. That just illustrates that some of them are still in that unsure box, not thought in detail. So that's important. But that amounts to 1.7 million Scots. You've got 1.3 million in the right, 28% ruling it out completely, but you've got this big bucket in the middle who have not thought in detail, but they might take a 2021 Scottish holiday. A lot of work to be done to convert these people into holiday takers, and that's 1.6 million Scottish adults. And it does vary by the different life stage groups and by the levels of affluence. So you'll see here very clearly, families are actually the most likely group to have already booked or be planning or seriously considering a Scottish holiday this year, the three green categories. Pre-nesters, although a lot of them are very much, it's in their consideration, a bigger proportion of them have not thought in detail. They're in that light green category. So there's a lot of work to be done to convert them into actual holiday takers. And amongst empty nesters, more of them are in that red category on the right-hand side. And again, in terms of affluence, ABC ones more likely to be in the consideration and planning category than C2DEs. But how confident, now back in March, mid-March, how confident were they that those who were planning or thinking about or considering or already booked a Scottish holiday, how confident were they going to be able to take it? This is important because some people have booked these holidays probably 2 or 3 months before. Some of them had postponed them from last year. And you'll see there that amongst that group, a large proportion, 44%, weren't very confident that their holiday would be possible, that they were considering planning or booking. Now, we do break it down. So those who've already booked, this is the important one in this respect, 39% of those who've already booked a holiday weren't that confident it would be possible. Now, some of these holidays might well have been Easter breaks, and they booked them maybe very early in the year or late last year. So they were less confident. The group that were most confident to be able to take their holidays were those who were planning one. So they had the luxury of not having booked yet, so they still had flexibility around timing. So they felt that, yeah, I'm planning a holiday and I'll book it when I'm ready to, and when it seems safe to do so. And similar position for those considering a Scottish holiday, but those who hadn't thought in detail but might take a Scottish holiday were much more likely to think, well, it might not be possible anyway. I'm not very confident it will be possible. Almost 2/3 of them in that category. So again, just illustrating a lot of work to do. Now, this will have changed in the last month. There's probably more confidence now than there was back in mid-March, but things have moved. So second last slide before I hand over to Duncan, we asked people what was important to them when they're taking a holiday. As an industry, this is important because what we need to ensure is in place if the needs of Scots staycationers are to be met. So those Scots who had booked, were planning, considering, and thinking about staycation this year were asked to rate the importance of a range of factors if they were that were going to have to be in place if they were to take a 2021 Scottish staycation. And they're listed here on the screen. Now, we asked this question last year as well, amongst those considering a holiday, and they're listed in order of people who said they were either fairly important or very important. And you'll see here that at the top of the list, high standards of hygiene and cleanliness generally. And we often talk about these things as the hygienics. I mean, literally in this case, it is a hygienics, but over 9 in 10 Scots, 98% saying that hygiene and cleanliness and accommodation is an important factor. Now, that's always going to be the case. People are always going to say that's important, but especially at the moment, it's understandably especially important. But accommodation considerations generally, the quality and availability of the preferred types were also of high importance to around half. The 58% quality of accommodation, availability 49%. So really, really important. And especially at the moment, as perhaps last year, people felt they couldn't get exactly what they wanted because of availability. There was a big desire for self-catering, as we all know. And again, we'll come on to that. Duncan will come on to that in a few moments. But importantly, that is still there. And that's really important. Now, I'm going to put up here the figures from last year. And what shown here are the things that have changed a bit in the last 12 months. So things that are more important now than was the case a year ago was the range of places open and available to visit. That's had an increase of 10 percentage points on last year. Eating and drinking out options being available. That is more important now. So that probably reflects people who maybe took a holiday last year but want a fuller experience this year. That is more important than is the case. Whereas things like behaviours of other visitors and tourists, extent to which you can escape crowds of people, still really, really important, but maybe slightly less so than was the case last year. So lots of things to bear in mind here, and they highlight the key messages that the industry has got to get across to encourage some of these potential trips into actual trips. Two final points from me. First one is a question we asked last year as well, which was what sort of desire is there amongst people to really help the Scottish tourism industry? As Scottish residents, is there a desire to help the Scottish tourism industry to recover? And encouraging point is that is still there. It was there last year. 2/3 of Scots said it last year. Similar proportion this year saying the same thing. So there is a willingness to help tourism businesses amongst Scots, which is great news from an industry point of view, that support is there. But also importantly, people are still willing to go off the beaten track a little bit. They realise that maybe the busiest sites where they would traditionally maybe choose might be too busy, and they're willing to travel a bit further afield. And 3/4 of Scots are in agreement on that statement. Slightly lower than it was last year, but still a high proportion willing to go somewhere different. And I think that's really, really important. So a lot of things to take on board. I'm going to hand over to Duncan now, though. He's going to talk you through the actual, what these staycations might look like in terms of their makeup. Duncan.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, so as Jim said, there's a pretty large percentage of the Scots population are either planning or seriously considering taking a holiday in Scotland this year. So I'm going to go into a bit more detail about what they would hope and their sort of aspirations for these holidays this year. So first of all, in terms of when visits are likely to be taken, if you're able to click forward, Jim. Oh. Thank you, that's great. Okay, so overall, as you can see, the top bar shows the sort of timing. So we asked people essentially, when are you expecting to take trips in Scotland, holidays or short breaks in Scotland? So overall, 17% expected to take their trip fairly soon, before the end of June. But what we can see is a much larger percentage, those sort of green parts of the bar, about half of people planning a trip expected to take these during the summer months, or sort of between July and the end of September. 14% were going to wait longer and take their holiday towards the in the last quarter of the year. But also quite notably, the grey bar, you've got 18% of people saying they're not sure when, so they're thinking about it, considering it, but reflecting this sort of degree of uncertainty that a lot of people have. A lot of them are saying, I'm not really sure when, I just would like to take a trip, I am thinking about it. There are some demographic variations. So in terms of socioeconomic groups, the more affluent ABC ones are more likely to be certain. So you got a smaller percentage of them saying they don't know, whereas the C2DE is quite a lot more saying they're not sure. So there's a bit of a variation in that basis, but also in terms of people's age and life stage. So the pre-nesters in general more likely to take a number of the different boxes to be more certain about when. We've seen already where they are generally more likely to be confident about travel, keen to get traveling. Families, a higher percentage of families planning, as you might expect, to travel during the school summer holiday periods. So 43% in either July or August. And the empty nesters, again, reflecting the uncertainty that we've seen amongst that group, more so a much larger percentage, almost a quarter, saying I'd like to travel, but I still don't know when. So a little bit more reticent about making any firm plans in terms of when they're going to take their trip. If we look then also, we asked an open-ended question, say, well, where would you like to travel, or where are you planning to go if they'd reached that stage or even booked it? And this was an open-ended question, so people could type in the town, the village, or the actual area, and then we've categorized them into these familiar-looking regions here. So what you can see is that the highest appeal by far is the Highlands. So this varied from people just simply saying the Highlands to people actually named specific destinations within the Highlands. So half of planned trips, people are saying, I'm going to go to the Highlands. And that's fairly consistent across the different life stages, from the pre-nesters right through to the families and empty nesters. We can then see there's quite a drop-off in terms of the other places mentioned: Argyll and the Isles, Edinburgh and the Lothians, Aberdeen City and Shire, though all in the sort of top 4 or 5, Ayrshire and Arran, also in that kind of, when we rank it on that basis. Some other interesting sort of differences by life stage: younger people, pre-nesters, more likely to mention taking trips to Glasgow and Loch Lomond and the Trossachs. Families more likely than others to mention Ayrshire and Arran, Aberdeenshire, Edinburgh and the Lothians, Loch Lomond and the Trossachs as well, quite a high percentage. Empty nesters generally more likely to mention the most rural locations, so the Highlands, Argyll, Niles, but also areas to the south of Scotland, Dumfries and Galloway and the borders, holding a bit more appeal for that life stage than others. But one thing is, compared to last year when we asked this question, there seems to be a slight edging up in interest in the city destinations, Edinburgh and Glasgow particularly so. So there is a bit of a maybe an increased confidence about going to less rural places, but predominantly it is still very much rural locations that are appealing to the market. So moving on to the types of accommodation that people would like to use during their planned trips that they hope to take in Scotland this year. So first of all, the chart on the left simply shows, really, we asked people what would be your preferred accommodation choice, and you can see the distribution of answers there. So very clearly at the very top, almost half of people saying I'd like to stay in self-catering accommodation. So this reflects that the patterns that we saw last year, where there was very much an increased level of interest in self-catering, people find it appealing to be within just their own family group or within people that they know, certainly less mixing with strangers essentially. So that's continuing. But it is interesting to see, and maybe quite good for certain sectors to see that certain serviced accommodation types are also near the top there. Small hotels, guest houses, large hotels as well, all being selected by significant proportions of people as of interest. Now, if we look at the chart on the right, though, because those figures kind of almost mask, there are these changes, sort of swings in preference. We asked a question essentially saying, compared to before coronavirus, before the pandemic, are you any more or less likely to consider different types of accommodation? And so we can see the proportions who said they were more likely in green and the less likely in red. And then you do always have a large percentage of people say, well, not really any different. But if we look at that sort of net gain or loss, you can see that overall the sectors which are most likely to increase in interest are still, as we saw last year, very much self-catering, and also further down the line, camper van usage. There's a real increase in appeal of that. So again, the self-contained types of accommodation, but also to a lesser extent, small hotels increasing. We also see increases in interest in staying with friends and relatives, but that's often going to be because people have a great desire to see friends and relatives that they've not seen for some time. In terms of activities that people took part in or would like to take part in, again, we see some real shifts in opinions when we ask the question about what would you like to do, or would you be more likely to consider doing or less likely to consider doing compared to before coronavirus. So the big gains that we're seeing are the increase in interest in visiting the natural outdoors, rest and relaxation, active outdoor pursuits. I mean, they're all the top ones, and you know, good news is that these are all very relevant to your destination, of course, and what you can offer. We've also got, and it's interesting, we've got in the positive area, the net positive, visiting historic sites and properties and visiting purpose-built attractions. That wasn't the case when we asked this same question last spring and summer. So I think this change is reflecting that people are becoming more confident. They're, you know, the measures put in place by attractions, indoor attractions and so on are being seen, and that's causing people to say, no, I would be comfortable now, and in fact I'm more likely to visit than previously, for some people, or a very large percentage of people saying it's not made any difference for me. So that's good news, I would say, for those parts of the business and of the sector. The ones where it's less positive, though, as you can see towards the bottom, there are certain types of activities which people are, a very large percentage of the people saying I'm less likely to consider these still. So attending events and festivals, meeting and mixing with locals, very much the case there, where, you know, as you can imagine, people are still a little bit nervous, reluctant about being in crowds, being amongst lots of different people. And so these sorts of activities are still feeling very cautious at the point we did the survey. Similarly, other cultural activities like going to theatres and museums, shopping as well, people are more negative on balance about these activities. I saw the question in the chat, and we can come on to this at the end, about the different activities done by different life stages and so on. Pre-nesters are more likely, generally, we saw, more keen to take part in active outdoor pursuits, outdoor sports, and also to attend events and festivals. So I think that's something, and we've seen this in some other research we did with Creative Scotland, where I think younger people are more confident, generally less worried about the virus, but also more willing to get back to attending music festivals, live events, etc. So in terms of eating and drinking out, again, an interesting picture and some shifts in opinions. So obviously eating and drinking out and the food that you consume during a holiday is a very important part of the experience, particularly in areas like yours again. So if we look at, we asked the question about whether people are any more or less likely to consider eating and drinking out in restaurants and bars on the left. So again, you can see a large proportion of people saying it's no different, some people saying more, but overall there's a net negative. We've got more people saying less likely to do this than more likely to do so, so that we could see an overall downward trend as things stand. Whereas we've got the opposite situation where there's a net increase in people saying, yeah, I'd buy takeaway food during my holiday, or even more so, I'd buy groceries and cook my own meals on holiday. So there's a number of actions which maybe need to be done off the back of this. I mean, big picture, it may be some kind of stimulus, some kind of scheme such as Eat Out to Help Out could be needed by the hospitality industry to encourage people to use restaurants and bars again. but also in terms of what it's important for self-catering companies, etc., or businesses to make sure that people are able to buy and order in local food and drink, you know, so it benefits your local economy rather than filling up the car at home and driving up and just bringing all their food with them. So it's making sure that to cater for these changing needs, I guess. Okay, so that's a little bit more about the sort of details of the types of trips people are looking to have, the accommodation, the activities. I'm now going to go through a few results which relate to sort of the flip side of this, where we asked some of asked all of our survey respondents how they felt about the return of tourism to their area. So thinking about themselves as residents of the communities that they live in. Now, we've asked this question previously, as shown in the chart, and essentially what we were able to do is ask people to what extent we've got 5 different answer options, from green on the left to red on the right, and to which of these best described how they were currently feeling. So that is a spectrum essentially going from people saying I'm totally comfortable and ready to welcome visitors from anywhere back to my area now, right through to the other side of the spectrum, as you can see, where people are saying I'm extremely concerned and would prefer no visitors coming to my area at all yet. And then areas in between where people were fairly comfortable, or comfortable with visitors just from Scotland, or comfortable with just local visitors in the sort of red area. So when we first asked this in July last year, you can see a really polarized picture where you had almost equal proportions of people saying they were comfortable or fairly comfortable to those saying that they had concerns and, you know, were extremely concerned. We then repeated that question just a month later, but after the reopening of tourism last year, and you could see with that change, there'd been an increased percentage of people feeling more comfortable and a decrease in those saying they were very, very concerned. So things had moved in a positive direction in terms of the welcoming of visitors to communities. We asked it again in March this year, and you can see again, the percentage of people saying that they're ready for tourism has increased. It's more positive. We now have a situation where basically half of the population are in the totally comfortable or fairly comfortable, the green bars. However, we still do have a third of the population who are concerned. They just want locals, they don't want any visitors. So we need to be mindful of these community concerns amongst certain groups. Looking at the results by where people live, there are some differences, as you might imagine. The most positive, the largest sort of green parts of the bar were amongst people who lived in the main cities in Scotland, and also the central belt, but also the sort of rural north. You know, we've got sort of higher percentage of the national norm, so that's including Highlands and Aberdeenshire. However, in rural south, so the Scottish borders, Dumfries and Galloway, South Lanarkshire, we've actually got a bit more of a negative picture in terms of there are more concerns amongst people living in those areas. And we saw that pattern throughout last year as well when we asked the same question. So there are regional differences, and there will be factors which drive that, of course. Okay, so that's the sort of community view. We've covered a lot of ground. I'm just going to very quickly go through a couple of sort of summary charts now, just sort of the key points that we've pulled out today. So we've seen there is room for optimism. We should feel optimistic, but there are some challenges ahead for the industry. Visitors won't necessarily just come because we're reopening. So, you know, we've seen that there are a lot of groups who are still quite concerned about the risks of transmission, or those who are just saying, I'm going to wait before I make a booking or take a trip because I want to see the vaccine rollout, or I want to see how things are going, or I want to avoid the stampede, as one person said at the start, as tourism reopens. People are holding back in some cases, others are eager to go. So it is quite polarized, the situation. And we also see that only at the time we did the survey, a very small percentage of people actually made bookings yet, but that has probably changed a lot over the last month since we did the survey. And also, as Jim presented, we saw that there are certain things that are very important to visitors, particularly hygiene and cleanliness, but also increasingly compared to when we did the survey a year ago, there's increasing importance, people knowing that there are things are open, the industry is open, that there'll be things to do when they get to the destination there. If we go into the next slide, in terms of when people are planning to trip, as I've just said, largely summer months, but some people are holding fire, not sure when they're going to go, or waiting until the fourth quarter. Rural locations look like they're going to have the greatest appeal. And also in terms of accommodation, self-catering looks like it'll have the greatest swing in terms of increased appeal, but not entirely, there is still also a degree of interest in serviced accommodation, in particular smaller properties as well. Outdoor natural activities are the ones which hold the greatest appeal. And also that final slide, as I just showed to you there is a more positive view amongst communities that more than half the population, around about half the population, now feel comfortable to welcome visitors back. So that's been a rattle through our results. The full report's available on our website, and you can see the link there. You can download it, and we're obviously happy to take any questions just now too.
Wow. See, you need to do these. You need to make these things 2 hours long.
Yeah.
So we can ask you 1 hour and 6 minutes of questions. So I mean, you addressed Paul's question, I think. But I mean, for me, good grief, wow. This is so much useful information. Staycations. There is so much chat about staycations. Do you actually think people know what they mean when they're talking about them? I do wonder whether we misunderstand actually and I feel that there isn't going to be a wave of new income because many of the, a lot of the bookings are deferred from last year. So actually, I mean, maybe sometimes it doesn't quite look as simple as it's being portrayed in the media. Huh?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I mean, staycations, we didn't use the term at all in our survey. I mean, that's very much how we are presenting it back to you guys. Yeah, absolutely, in inverted commas. But yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of these bookings this year may well have been deferred from last year. It'd be really nice to be able to tell you, we've just done another survey a month later, and this is how different it is. Obviously, we're not in that position at the moment. We will be doing surveys throughout the summer, so we'll be able to track it. But this is very much an early viewpoint, if you like, before a lot of decisions were made public around opening up and so on. So people were kind of giving their hopes and thoughts around what they would do in a bit of a vacuum based on what they thought might happen. It will be different now, even just a month later. But yeah, I'm not sure I like the term staycation. It's a bit
controversy over that word, isn't it?
I hate it, I have to say. So really interesting there from Howard, actually. Price sensitivity. You get a sense that there is price sensitivity. I think
we didn't really ask about it, but I think, well, when we looked at the importance and so of things, and Jim chip in here as well, obviously, I think that there is an opportunity we saw from some of our previous waves for people who've experienced Scotland, who wouldn't normally experience Scotland, to get a great experience and then want to visit in Scotland again and make it more of a thing they do. But if it costs more than it's worth, if they don't feel like they're getting value for money, I think that could be put at risk almost. It's got to be, they can't feel exploited or like that was cost an absolute fortune and you know what, it rained. It needs to be something that they really embrace, they enjoy, and they want to do again. And we can do that. We've got the product, but yeah, we've got to be careful not to overprice it, I feel. But that's more opinion than perhaps based on the data.
Yes, but nobody comes to Scotland for the weather. I guess the thing is, our food is now better than it's ever been. Our welcome should be better than it's ever been. And I think we can't be. I think I said this to you before we went live, that this is now the opportunity for us as an industry to speak with one voice and share that. If you are busy, share the customer. If you know that distillery is busy, then put them in that one. That whole collaborative thing now.
And it's not about bargain basement or anything at all. That's not our winning sort of formula. It's about absolute fantastic quality and making it worth the price, which won't be cheap because we don't want to be cheap, but we want to be really worth it.
Yeah, I would say on that, Rory, I think this is where the real challenge is for the industry this year. There is potential. There's potential to introduce Scotland to people who wouldn't normally maybe consider Scotland for a longer summer holiday or a main holiday.
Yeah, like the Scottish people.
Yeah. But also people who maybe not really discovered Scotland in recent years. They've not really experienced Scotland much in recent years. There's a huge opportunity here, but we've got to try and get that over the line. We've got to try and persuade them that it's worth their while doing it. So price plays a role, but value is actually much, much more important. If they feel they paid what might feel quite an expensive price, but they've had fantastic value because of the quality of the accommodation, the welcome they've received, everything, all the ducks in a row, and the industry working together as one, I think is a big part of that. People have said they want places to be open. Now, there's a limit to which that's going to be possible because of restrictions, but just making sure that if you're in the accommodation business, that you've got very clear links and speaking with the same voice as local producers, so you're able to offer local produce if you're a self-catering property, and say, look, if you want to get good fresh eggs, here's where we get them, yeah. Or if you're looking for the best of venison or whatever it is, local alcoholic beverages and so on. This is a real opportunity for us all to work together, and also pointing people in the direction of activity operators that are doing things as well, so that people can fill their days and not feel that, well, I'm away from home, but there's actually not that much to do. Now, I'm not saying that was a problem last year, but I think clearly people are wanting more this year than was maybe the case last year. So it's a real challenge, but it's also a bit of an opportunity for everybody to speak under one voice.
And they want that local knowledge as well, that kind of insider tip that a chance conversation can offer them.
Those are quite magical, those kind of really authentic moments, just sort of, that can be great. Yeah. That's
right. Okay, so I know you guys have to go, and we're all, it's a sunny afternoon, so we all want a Poets Day and all that. But 2 questions. So I'm going to answer Claudia's question. Seasonality, attractions capacity due to COVID-19. Do we anticipate customer behaviour change due to new ways of operation? Absolutely, because your distilleries that used to offer a trip for 12 people now can't, or potentially won't. And they are all having to adapt. And it is difficult, and I think particularly challenging for some of the bigger distilleries because their business model is fundamentally altered. I know that, as you will also, Claudia, many of the distilleries haven't yet decided quite what and when, because they're not quite sure how. And I'm not sure we've seen the guidance that says you can even have a dram yet on your whiskey tour. So I know the Scottish Government are teasing that around at the highest level. So yeah, I think everything's going to change, certainly around distilleries. The outdoor events is different, but you can fewer people on a rib trip with North 58. You can have fewer people in Johnson's to go around the mill tour. So all of that's going to change. And then there's a question or a comment from Paul that the standard 7 days down to maybe 3 or 4. It's an interesting one because I've seen it in both directions, I think. Yeah. I've seen people staying for longer because they want to make more out of it, but I've also seen a lot of people staying for shorter periods because maybe they're doing 2 or 3 different destinations.
Yeah. We didn't actually ask that. It's a very good question, actually, and it's one maybe for us to log for future waves of research. We didn't ask people about length of trip and to what extent that might change, but I think for some people, I think you're right, it probably works in both ways. For some people, it's going to be a dip a toe in the water moment, right? I'm going to take a long weekend break because I'm still not that sure about what I'm going to get. Like for others, it might be, well, I need to get away for a longer holiday than I normally would in Scotland. So I know where I'm going, so I'm going to make the most of that. So I think it probably works both ways, but I think that's one that we will actually, because I think that'd be a useful one.
Absolutely. I've taken a note of a lot of these questions because, as Jim mentioned, we're going to be involved in ongoing work, and I think this is the kind of thing that we can both ask people what their plans are, but also it'll be very interesting to see what's happened, in the previous month, that kind of thing, as we go through the season.
Perfect. I think you need now. There's obviously a royalty fee is going to have to find its way to Paul Johnson every time you ask that question.
I like the good ideas. We can pretend there are good ideas.
Yes, that's right. Well, hey, what is this? Yes. Sincere start with flattery or whatever it is. Guys, I can't thank you enough. We are deeply indebted to all of our industry partners who have helped us and advised us and informed us over the past year. We look forward to the day when we can actually see your faces in our bloody towns. So, Jim, Duncan, everyone. Oop! I think I've just annoyed my Alexa in the background there. Doesn't know that question apparently. Thank you all. Thank you for your times this afternoon, all our attendees, and we're always just at the end of the phone or an email. And as Jim and Duncan both said, the insight reports are easily accessible from the website and are also on our COVID page in the handy useful links box at the bottom of the page. So thanks guys, thanks everyone.